Hey everyone, welcome back to my Absolute Beginner's Guide into Europa Universalis V. This is Rex. Feel free to leave a like and subscribe, and let's get started. In this video, let's go over the markets and trading, and in the next video, we will go over buildings and employment. I'll go through a lot of detail in the first parts of this video, but then at the end, I'll show you a much simpler way to interact with the market. Now, let's take a minute and first introduce a few buzzwords and then go into much more detail. Let's look at the borders of our country and watch them change when I select the market or the market map mode found here that I saved at the bottom of my bar. So a market doesn't necessarily have to incorporate the borders of your nation. The market is representative of an abstract region within which goods are bought and sold. Let's click on the London market. All the locations that are within the market borders send their raw or produced goods to the market center, like Thetford here. And then those goods are consumed by the population or used by the location buildings in that market. The determining factor for which locations fall under a specific market is dependent on something called market attraction. So goods and resources are produced at the location level and then sent to the market center, contributing to your supply. Thetford and all these other locations in the market are sending supply to the market, and Thetford is sending 5.35 wool to the market by this route here. And for example, where is Thetford? Right here. And for example, because Thetford is producing wool, we can see that each level of resource upgrade produces 1.07 wool times 5 buildings, gives us the total output. Again, we'll return to buildings in the next video. So let's go back to the London market. And we can see that 5.35 supply from Thetford right there. Then what happens is your population and buildings that fall under that market get first dibs to use those goods as represented by demand. Certainly, if we have more supply than demand, we get a surplus. Any surplus goods that are then left over and not being used are then placed into storage or your stockpile, found here, and are then available to trade. Markets will then trade these excess goods between themselves based on the amount of trade capacity you have. And let's get to the trading screen. Based on the amount of trade capacity that you have, or they have, and how much relative profit they can make. Let's click back on markets, go back to London, and show you this. The market that has first dibs to trade a certain resource with another market is dependent on something called trade advantage. Now let's go into more detail and introduce everything I just said. So let's start here at Oxford. We can see the route goods are being transported to and from the market capital by this green line thing. We can see that just like proximity, there is an efficiency cost to go from one location to another, which is modified by roads or terrain bonuses such as this river. And the better efficiency you have transporting goods between two locations is something called market access. So let's go to the location view and check out our market access of Oxford. Currently, this says that Oxford has a market access of 87%. That's because it's modified from 100%, as we said before, because of the terrain and any terrain bonuses such as rivers, ports, naval presence, roads, etc. Again, just like your proximity. Now juxtapose the 87% market proximity in Oxford with York. If I go up to York, click on York, I see that York has a market access of 62%. So why is this important? If I look at the Spinners Guild in York, we should have a 1-to-1 ratio of 1 wool worth 2.5 ducats to 1 cloth worth 3 ducats. But because our market access is only 62%, we are only getting 0.62 wool and then producing 0.62 wool. Now the same thing with Oxford. If I click on Oxford and go to their Spinners Guild, because we have 87% market access in Oxford, we are actually taking 0.87 wool and producing 0.97 cloth. So if we improve the proximity, we can improve the efficiency of our production and thus more goods to the market. So that's market access. Now let's go back to the London market and introduce market attraction. Now the size of the borders of your market and thus the locations which are included in your market depend on something called market attraction. For example, the county of Ripon, or the location of Ripon, is part of our country, but has decided instead to buy and sell its goods in the Edinburgh market. That's because Edinburgh has a higher market attraction than London in this area. If I hover over London, I can see that although our market attraction is higher compared to Edinburgh, Ripon has a market access of 74%, whereas London has a market access of 58%. So if we improve access or proximity to this location may actually switch over to belong to our market. If instead of proximity, you want to increase your market attraction, if I hover over market attraction here, it says that our market attraction is high, and we're getting an extra bonus here because of our prestige, which is found up here, and the development of our country, as well as staffed buildings in the given location. All that being said, remember that proximity and access becomes harder the further away a location is to your market center, and for us it's London. So it's not the absolute end of the world if your market doesn't increase with size and you actually end up controlling or being a partial controller of multiple markets. Now let's look at the actual goods produced by our market. If I go to goods here, remember, first dibs for goods goes first to your building needs and population needs. Then whatever is left over goes into your stockpile and is available for trading. So although other countries can import and export to your market, don't worry about them causing a goods or population needs deficit. The pictures represent the goods, and what's highlighted on the map are the locations where they can be gathered or produced. Next, we have the current supply and where your supply is coming or being imported from. Next is the demand and the industry or exports that are using the good, and next to that is the monthly surplus that's not currently being used and instead being placed in the stockpile. Next to that is the baseline market price, and next to that is how much the good currently costs in your market. Since it's cheaper than baseline, notice here how there's kind of a small pile of copper coins. Closer to the baseline price is silver coins, and a very expensive good in your market is represented by gold coins, and is represented by gold coins, which I can see here. From here, you can click on buildings or the resource button to get more of that good in your country, or click to export or import or export here. But remember that our Spinners Guild uses wool to make cloth. So even though we have a surplus and we could export this wool as much as we want, It would actually be advantageous to keep wool at a surplus so prices stay low for our Spinners Guild. We can actually choose to export more cloth, which would then make cloth rarer and more expensive in our market, making our buildings more profitable. But although we'd make more income from these buildings, our population that relies on cloth would also have to pay more, which wouldn't make them that happy. Now our trades, once we set them, will show up here. Next to this is a readout of countries that have something called trade advantage in your market, which we introduced before. Trade advantage basically determines who gets their orders for goods first. Remember that population and buildings in your market automatically get first dibs. Now here's what kind of tripped me up when trying to understand this thing. When I hover over the description of trade advantage, it says, the trade advantage of countries in a market determines who will be able to get their exports fulfilled first. So what the heck does that mean? Well, think of it this way. I currently have the largest trade advantage in this market, and that's because of my owned locations, and we have maritime presence. Now, because I'm the boss of the market, I can decide what surplus goods go where. But if I want to import a good from another market, let's say Paris, I don't have much trade advantage here, so I can't force them to send me the goods I want. Now, if I want a good from them, but so does Normandy or Brittany, they would be able to get their goods first, and I would only have access to leftovers if any remain. So let's fast forward a few months, and then I'll show you what I mean. Okay, so let's take silver, for example. Let's go to our market. Let's search for silver in the goods tab. And I see here that I have a tiny bit left over in the stockpile. I have 2 locations mining silver, providing me with 2.23 silver good. Of that 2.23 silver good, 0.68 is being used by our nobles, and 0.09 is being used for minting. Now, after these needs are met, because we have some left over, other countries are requesting us to export those goods, notably Holland, Iceland, Greenland, and the Hansa League. But not all of them will be able to fill their orders because we won't have enough left over at the end of the day. So if I go to the Countries tab, first dibs to request us to export the good, which is actually an import for them, will fall to those with the highest trade advantage. But we have the highest trade advantage here, and shoot, you know what? This is our country, and let's just say we want to export everything. Now, this may not be very profitable for us, but let's just show this in action. So let's go back to our goods. Let's click silver, and let's say we want to export silver to the Barcelona market. So let's just send 1.50 silver to the Barcelona market. We'll click that. Then we go back to our trade tab, and we see that now we are exporting silver to Barcelona. So all of our export orders are going to be filled first, and they're going to be sent to Barcelona. Let's fast forward another month and see what happens. Now, if we take a look at silver, we see that all those other countries no longer show up for their import request under silver demand here, because our trade advantage in this market took precedence and we're sending everything to Barcelona. But remember, we aren't going to have that high of a trade advantage in other markets yet. So let's say I want to import dyes. Let's import it from the Paris market because that looks the most profitable. But I see right here that it shows that their demand right now is exceeding supply. And that's because a bunch of other countries or vassals in the market are requesting the same good. Now here's what's really confusing, but don't get tripped up from this. When I hover over demand, we can actually see that those countries are exporting on their own into our market because they can see that we actually have a need for this. It's cheap for them to buy or produce, but it's worth a lot to us, which means they are selling their low-cost dyes to our merchants because it's expensive in our market and our merchants actually want it. So if I go back and look at dyes again, this is essentially showing that we are getting 9 dies per month from those other countries interacting with our market. Other countries will continue to export to us as long as it's profitable for them. Other countries will automatically export goods to markets where prices are high, but here's the key. We didn't choose for them to do this. They did so automatically because they did it for their own profit, not because you allowed it. Now, as supply increases, the price will eventually fall, and their exports of dies to you will automatically slow or stop. There is no incentive to oversupply, and this is because, as you'll see soon, exporting a good is limited by trade capacity, market access, and how much that trade route costs to maintain. Okay, so let's click on the trade and see what happens. So let's go back to view our trades. So now this trade will take a month to set up, and we're anticipating a profit of 2 ducats. But remember that if I click on the Paris market, I can see that we are kind of a small fish when it comes to requesting goods based on our trade advantage. And we only get trade income based on the routes that we select, which means that we will only get the good if these other countries that have higher trade advantage than us aren't competing for the same good. And if they are competing for the same good, the amount they request takes priority, and we essentially fill whatever is left over, like I said before. We can see when I click back on our market and go to trades, that prompt actually prompts us here and says Brittany and Normandy have a higher trade advantage in the Paris market and are blocking us from getting access to enough goods for this trade. So we may not be able to get any goods at all, or diminishing returns from this trade route that we just set up. Now, okay, cool. We see that we have a few trades here, and we should be earning, about 4 ducats per month. But if I go back to my balance screen, I can see that I'm only getting 2 ducats per month. That's because the amount of trade income you get is actually divided amongst the estates, and the amount of income you get is based on your total crown power. And for more details on crown power, feel free to watch my prior video. Now, that was a ton of detail in regards to trade, and there are ways that you can manipulate other markets, but I'll save that for our discussion on politics and warfare, where we'll go into embargoing, blockading, and the like. But for now, let me just show you how to manage all of this a lot easier. So instead of going just through the market tab and sorting by all your goods and things like that, let's just go to the, where is it? Let's just go to the trading tab up here. So here's a basic readout of all the trades the game suggests you make. Some are for profit, others are for building and population needs. Up here, we currently have our London market selected, but we can certainly select or cycle between the other markets that we are partially in if we want to manipulate those. But the ones that you don't have a lot of access to locations in or aren't super important, I just recommend keeping these automated for now and just really managing your own market. So here we have our current market, our trade capacity, which is also found here. And notice how this went down a little bit because we've already activated a couple trades. And if I click current trades, this is the current cost of these trade routes minus our trade capacity, gives us this number here. We also have suggestions for missing inputs that our buildings or government need, missing inputs that our pops need, and the current food levels of the market. And I'll get into food in the next video. You can also see this broken down if you just hover over the market that you're currently looking at. And like I just showed, here's a current readout of our current trades and an easier way to see them on kind of like a macro scale. Below this are suggestions that the game gives you for addressing your population needs or your building needs. But let's just cover market automation really quick. So if I was to keep this checked and slide market automation all the way to the right, all that would do is make the game automatically select trades for you that you haven't already selected. And the trades that you've already selected are currently locked by this button here, and you can always declick this and cancel the trade route. So what would happen is these routes would stay here these 2 routes would stay here until the end of the game. but the game would just automatically select other trades under your manual trade capacity cap, thus leaving you both the ability to select the trades that you want and not have to micro so much. And the reason this is important is because the game prioritizes trade routes automatically based on profitability. But notice here that we have several suggestions for population needs, and the happiness of our population is actually really important. I can actually see here, when I hover over the population bar, that it looks like our population needs a lot of sturdy grains. And we can also see that here by hovering over the market map mode. So let's look at what this actual readout is actually trying to tell us. So if I take a look at my current silver export trade, I can actually see that per trade capacity, I'm making 1.66 ducats. So don't get tripped up, because that green number is the amount of profit you get per trade capacity. And we are making a total profit from this route of 4.52 ducats because it's relatively cheap in London, and we're selling it to a relatively high price to the exporters that's selling at 8.93 ducats in the Barcelona market. And I can see that 4.52 profit. If I go back to my balance screen, I go to my trade income, I sort by, I'm seeing that I'm getting a fraction of this because of my crown power, and I can see that the profit from silver market to Barcelona market is plus 4.52. Now lastly, you can adjust these sliders, how much trade capacity or even goods you want before you initiate the trade, or even during a trade, to just kind of adjust your profits or needs of your populations as needed. So that being said, that was markets and trade kind of in a nutshell. Now let's just go back to the start of the game, and I'll kind of show you a much easier way of how to synthesize all the information I gave to you in order to adjust and start working with your market. Okay, so now we're back at the start of the game. Let's click on the economy tab, and we see that we aren't getting any trade income. So let's change that. Let's go to the market and kind of see what our greatest surpluses and needs are. If I click on the trading tab, I see, okay, looks like sturdy grains and furniture are in need for a population. So it looks like I need 8 sturdy grains. If I go to my population needs, it looks like if I try to find grains here, looks like I can satisfy about half of that, but I'm using a lot of trade capacity here. I can certainly go to Krakow and almost accomplish that deficit, but I'm going to be using my entire trade capacity. So it looks like I won't be able to hit that number, and that could really kind of affect the potential trade income that I can get. So instead, sure, let's just get some jewelry from Cologne. Let's click that. Let's get some fine cloth from Foss. And we can import some dyes from Paris. And looks like we have 12.66 trade capacity left over. So let's set our market automation to handle kind of the rest of the trades, and let's fast forward a month and see what happens. Okay, so here's our trade readout now. It actually looks like a bunch of people wanted some jewelry from Cologne, so we weren't able to accomplish any of our supply. That's probably because we have low trade advantage in that market, as shown up here, but we're actually still paying to maintain this trade route. So let's right click to get rid of that. Click OK. And it does look like we need some tar, but the game automatically clicked that, so let's just declick that here. And then let's keep tinkering with this until the markets settle and we can generate some stable income. So, okay, that is a very brief overview of the markets and trade. In the next video, let's discuss buildings and rectifying some of our goods needs, and that way we can be even more competitive in our market. This is Rex. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one.